My name is Derek Fortini. I'm the director of the Estes Park Museum. Today is September 14th, 2023. Today we'll be interviewing Robert Wands, and we are located at 710 Laurel Lane, Estes Park, Colorado, at the Robert Wands Studio and Gallery. So Bob, if you can just go ahead and state your name, your birth date, and where you were born to get going.
Robert Wands. My birthday is June 24th, 1939. Denver, Colorado is where I was born.
Great. And we're just going to start off with some questions about your father, Alfred Wands, if that's okay.
Sure.
And how did your father get into painting?
Well, he lived in Cleveland, and he was really a very poor family. So he had to find work from different places. So he did a lot of mowing lawns. And at this one place, the garage was where the lawnmower was kept. There were big vaults of clay. And my dad took a hunk of the clay one day, took it home and modeled it, had fun with it, and then felt guilty about it, so he took it back to the owner of the garage and asked that he be forgiven for taking the clay. And the owner of the garage happened to be the head of the sculpture department in Cleveland Art Institute. So he told Dad, he said, "You did a good job on that. How would you like to go visit the Art Institute?" So Dad said, "Sure." And it was pretty much routine after that. He became a student. Although they couldn't afford the tuition at the Art Institute, they first offered him a situation where he could actually major in sculpture. And he said he'd really rather do painting. So he spent his 4 years there doing things, maintenance work and cleaning of the cafeteria and that type of job.
So now I'm curious to know, did he ever do any other sculpting, or did he just stick to painting after that?
Well, he did some sculpture. In fact, he took both the top prize in painting and in sculpture. But, and the prize was, and would be a second year, or fifth year really, free of charge. But he turned down the opportunity to be working in sculpture, because at that time, if you did a model in a clay or in a wax, it had to be shipped to Europe to be cast. There was no foundries for sculpture at that time, not in the U.S.
So when he came out of his schooling, was he able to just be a professional painter at that time?
Well, it was a very poor time. He did receive a cash award that he did use to travel. And so he did go to Europe. He studied at the Paris Julian. And then he went on from there. While he was in Europe, he went to Germany and did some study there, at the Fine Arts School there, and the Netherlands too, before he came back.
Do you know if he had any favorite artists of his own, or inspirations maybe?
Well, there were contemporaries of his that he did enjoy, and I'm having a little trouble remembering some of them now, but he did have a small collection of things that he had worked on, prints they had made, and that type of thing that I still have.
When did your father teach you how to paint, and what was that like?
Well, my sister, who was 4 years older, and we would go up to Dad's studio, and we would just lay on the floor and take some crayons and start coloring. And Dad had made some black and white lithographs, and some of them printed well, some didn't. So he would give us the ones that we could color. So we went from black and white to colored crayons, and just had a grand time at it. I guess I got the bug, and my sister didn't do too much after that, other than fly tying for fishing, that type of thing. But that was probably the beginning of it.
What would you say, fast forwarding some now, what was the most valuable lesson your father taught you, you think, with painting?
Well, my dad was a college art professor, and when I got to that point, I was also a college art professor. Why, he would do paintings, and he would sell the rights to publish them to the Winning Tree Company. And the owner of the company, would have Dad bring whatever he thought would be suitable in, and he would photograph it. So one time, I was painting in Dad's studio, and I was frustrated with what was happening. I was trying to do a winter landscape, and it just wasn't interesting. And so Dad came into the studio, and I said, "Dad, what can I do to this?" Oh, he just looked at it for a while. He said, "Give it some oomph," and walked out. Oh, I was mad. I was so mad, I grabbed the brush, I dipped it in about 3 different colors, and I started slashing it on the canvas. And I kept working it, and pretty soon I blended it in a little bit. And then Dad came back in and said, "That's what I'm talking about."
That's phenomenal.
I should also mention that painting, I took it with Dad one time when he was delivering some paintings to the Winning Tree office. And he says, "Oh, bring that painting along and show it to Ed Trumbull." He was the owner of the business. So Ed took a look at it, and he said, "I'll buy that from you." So that was one of the first oil paintings I had ever sold. I got $500 for. So that was back in 1957.
So you mentioned your father's studio. Where was it located?
Well, the studio in Denver was located on Ivanhoe Street. It had been a home of an artist, and there was a second floor over the garage. So the back bedroom had a stairway that led up to the studio. That was probably the major studio for many years. And of course, this studio here has an interesting history to it. Here in Estes Park, why Dad did have the cabin. It was one that was moved into the location it's at because the rangers or the national park had decided to do away with that strip of land that is near the new entrance now. And it was full of cabins and people's cars, and it was kind of messy. So they condemned all the cabins that were between the current road and the High Drive Road. So there's a little green strip in there. Well, that's where the cabin came from. But then Dad went to an auction that the National Park was putting on, and that was of the Stead's Ranch. Stead's Ranch had done quite a bit of interesting things. They had built a 9-hole golf course on their property, and of course it was right in the middle there of the Marine Park. Well, Stead's was finally bought out by the park, and Dad went to this sale, and he looked around at the cabins, and he took this space right here that we're sitting in, which was the pro shop for the 9-hole golf course. And he had it moved by movers from Marine Park up to this location, and a foundation put in, all for the sum of $400. That was back in '59.
And so that's the studio itself. Where was his gallery to represent him? Was it down on Elkhorn Avenue in downtown area?
Dad had many different positions. He was a professor of art at the Colorado Women's College for 18 years. During that time, he was approached, when he came from Cleveland in 1930, he was approached as a well-known artist, and people had heard of him. And he had had many exhibits at the Cleveland Art Institute and at the Cleveland Museum as well. So the Art Guild came and talked to him. They had a head of their guild was ill and not, well, he had cancer. And so they asked him to take over. So for several years, he was the head of the Artists Guild in Denver. He also was the head of the Denver Civic Center art displays. In other words, any sculptures or anything else had to go through his committee, and he was the president of it for several years. And that was certainly a contact that he made, and people began to know him throughout Denver. Basically, though, he sold his own work. We would sometimes have to eat our dinner very fast because there was somebody going to be coming at 7 o'clock to the house to see paintings. And we would have to clear the table quickly with the doorbell rang. And I would help him begin to move some of the paintings from the studio upstairs down to the living room. So that became his gallery in many ways. He did have some connections with a few places, small galleries in Denver. But he was a salesman from the word go. He would take his paintings, put them in the car, and he would go to a neighborhood that he didn't know anybody and start knocking on doors with a painting under his arm. The floor brush man was working the other side of the street. He was working the opposite side. Somebody come to the door, he'd hold up the painting and show him the painting and say, "Would you like to see this painting in your home and maybe a few others that I have in the car?" And he'd introduce himself, of course. Well, I figured, well, here's a college professor. He's a professional, so why not let him in? And so he kept track of new homes being built, and he would give them, maybe 6 months before, they'd have to get their furniture and all that, and he'd go knock on doors. He tried to get me to do it. I did it a little bit. He had some prints, serigraph prints that he had made that I would take and go from door to door, but I didn't have the heart for it as he had. But he was always thinking of things like that. I mean, he was a member of the Chamber of Commerce, probably the only artist that ever was a member of the Denver Chamber of Commerce. But he got to know people there. And he would tell me, well, I'd go into lunch. They'd have their lunch and meetings. And friends would wave, "Hey, Al, come on, sit over here." He'd say, "No," he says, I'm going this way, I'm going over here. And he'd go find somebody he didn't know, sit down, introduce himself, and tell him who he was and what he was doing. So he's a born salesman.
Is there any one thing that you might consider the highlight of your father's career? Whether it was like a show or an award that he got or anything like that?
Well, he did send paintings all over the United States to exhibits, and he did take some good prizes that way too. But I think what really was his highlight was to travel. So as soon as he was through with his schooling, he did travel to Europe. He worked both at the Paris art school there, and then the German school. In fact, one of the interesting things he told me was, and of course this was way back in the 1920s, he said he would go to lunch. He didn't eat breakfast or supper, but he would go to lunch in a a little cafe. And there was always in the corner there in Germany, there was a group of men huddled together, and one little short guy and some taller guys around him. So he asked the owner of the cafe, who was the little short man there? And he says, "Oh, that's Adolf Hitler." So Hitler was eating lunch with my dad.
Do you have any other memorable stories between you and your father that you'd like to share with us?
Well, another situation that was a great thing for me was that he quit teaching after a while, and he decided he just wanted to do some traveling and that type of thing. So he went to California and found out that, you know, the ocean there was fantastic, rough seas, great splashing waters over rocks, a lovely subject. So he came back and he said, "Okay, next year we're going to California." Well, he kept the house, rented it, and we would go out to California at the end of Christmas, between semester breaks, my sister and I, and my mom, and we would go and rent a house in Carmel, California. Beautiful place. And we did that when I was in grade school. We did that when my sister was in high school, and then when I was in high school also. So for quite a few years we would go to California after Christmas. And he did an excellent job with the oceans. He would sit for 2 weeks after we would get there, just sit there and study the ocean before we would begin a painting. And he had gallery connections there in Carmel. And Carmel is a very art center that a lot of people travel to just for good artwork.
I'm curious, when did you join your father in the studio more? Was it before or after college for you?
Well, in a way, it was during. I did have some other jobs for a while. I worked on the aerial tramway. I made 2,800 round trips over a period of few years that I worked there. And then after that, I decided, well, I wanted to be park ranger. So I found out, you know, you write to your congressman. And I was park ranger for about 5-6 years after that. So I wasn't around the studio all that much at that time, although most of my ranger time was spent at the gate. It was a good experience that I had there. And I did get stuck with the night shift. It was from midnight to 7 o'clock in the morning sometimes, but it was getting out and seeing that area of the park too. So then my dad went to work for the YMCA, and that was a interesting situation because he was painting all over the valley, And he went up to the Y and set up his easel where he had a good view of, I think it was Ypsilanti, and this fellow came by and looked at it and said, "Hey, that's great." And he introduced himself as the director of the YMCA. And he said, "How would you like to teach some art classes here at the Y?" And well, Dad said, "You know, I teach all winter. I think I'll just like to paint." Well, the director said, "We could give you a cabin, and you could eat at the employees' dining room." He said, "Why don't you think it over?" Well, Dad thought it over and said, "That sounds pretty good for the summer." So for 15 summers, he was the camp artist at the YMCA. And the little extension to that is that there was another artist that came in after Dad stopped doing that. And she was more of an abstract artist. She was there for about 7 years. And then she left. So I thought, well, you know, by that time I'd been working with Dad in his studio and painting alongside him on my own paintings and all. So I said, maybe I'll write my congressman. And I got a job as a park ranger for 5 years. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little more about your formal training and education in art in college?
Yeah, it was interesting, and I would submit once in a while to a competition, and they did have every year in Denver a high school graduate competition. And so in my senior year, I submitted a painting to the competition. And I got the prize, which was a year of schooling at the University of Denver. So that got me started there. And then along the way, Vance Kirkland had gone to the art institution in Cleveland, and he knew Dad, Dad knew him. So my instructor became Vance Kirkland, and pardon me, we would be invited over to dinner. So I'd have my instructor coming to house for dinner once in a while. Well, Vance Kirkland became the head of the department eventually, and head of the art department. So when I was there for 4 years, I had him as the head of the department. As I said, he was a friend of my dad, so he was even invited to dinner at our house. Vance did a lot of abstracts, and the school was all abstract, from, of course, design class on up into anything else. So I was doing things completely different than my father was doing. He liked to work outdoors. In fact, the studio was generally empty until he got back from the field and opened up. So, but basically, my work was abstract, so I worked with Vance. Vance had a lot of, well, he was involved in a lot of different committees and that type of thing. I would help out or get jobs through Vance Kirkland. He knew, an architect that needed to have a caretaker. So I became a caretaker of an architect who had palsy enough that he couldn't make a sketching. And so it was a personal connection with Vance. And he then, when I went for my master's degree, was then my advisor as well. I did a lot of kind of airy type paintings and for my master's. And I thought, well, okay, I like that feeling and that abstraction. So when came time to seal my thesis, to speak of, to decide on what I was going to do and get it done, it was Vance's suggestion. He said, well, why don't you do it as a work for your thesis, call it Atmospheric Conditions in Paint. Well, that seemed to rhyme well and sit well, so.
What style would you say you're best known for painting now?
Well, I've gone through the gamut of realism from working with my father outdoors. I mean, we traveled all over the valley here. We tried to get back by 1 o'clock so we could put the sign on the studio that we're open. And but no, I did the gamut, very abstract at the University of Denver. And then in the summertime, very realistic by painting on location, as we called it then, now as plein air painting.
Do you have a favorite subject matter to paint? Has it always been landscapes?
It's always been the landscape, yes. Between my 4th year at the University of Denver and my 5th year, I spent a year in Cleveland. I went back to the Cleveland Art Institute, where my dad had worked. It was a striking building, and first building I had seen with all glass all around it from all sides. And so I thought, yeah, I'd like to go take a year and go to school here. So that's what I did. I signed up and went to Cleveland. I lived in the Tudor Arms Hotel, which was a fabulous hotel, but they kept one floor open for graduate students. And I was a graduate student both at the Cleveland Art Institute and Western Reserve University, and the one that I keep forgetting, anyway, there's 3 universities right together there. And I did take quite a few classes at Northwest, so it was a good experience for me. Back to your original question.
That's a good question. I think I was asking what your favorite subject matter was to paint.
Okay, yeah. I really was starting the abstracts in Cleveland. In fact, the student show, I took the first place with a semi-visible pier out over the water with a guy sitting at the edge of the pier with a fishing rod. So it was realistic, but it was blurred, it was full of blues all the way through, not naturalistic colors altogether. And that took the first place in the student show, which was judged by a New York artist that was brought in to be the judge. Well, I got home. These were big canvases at that time. I got them into my car and got them home. And I said, what am I going to do with these? So I said, I know. There's a boat company not far away. I'm going to go over there and see if I can trade a painting for a speedboat, which I did. And so I had my play toy to play with for a while that way, but it was the beginning of, or maybe I should even say the end of my more abstract period.
I'm curious too, with your father being an art professor and a professional artist, what did he think of your abstract style?
He really didn't have anything against it. He didn't have anything really for it. As he was getting older, he was having some trouble with his eyes, and I tried to get him to do some abstracts. I've got a couple that are really great ones. He took a whole canvas and just put in faces. I mean, definite faces. Sometimes they were small, sometimes they were big, and the whole canvas is just faces. And we used to keep that in the studio. People would come in and say, well, what is this? And I say, well, they're faces, but how many faces do you think are there? And people would start trying to count them, you know. And I can't even remember if we ever got our correct number, but it was abstract enough that it was interesting for him and me too. Yeah.
Okay, so if we can talk about your medium a little bit, do you prefer oil paints or acrylic paints?
Well, I use oil paint more. I enjoy doing the acrylics as well, but it kind of depends on the spacing and everything else. I took first place in the state fair in Pueblo a good number of years back by doing a large landscape on the floor. Put the canvas on the floor and just leaning over it and painting it that way. And it was rather contemporary landscape because it's just off the top of my head as I was working. So I do like the acrylic because it does dry so quickly. And I know it frustrates some people that try it, but you just forget about it. Just keep some moisture going on around the room or humidifier or something.
And then do you also, have you done things in watercolor or any other mediums that?
Well, I enjoy watercolor. I try and do some every once in a while, or if I'm on a trip, I'll do watercolors. The sometimes you have to have the moisture just right on the paper, and it's a little time consuming to stretch the paper, but it's a great media. I do like it.
So in sitting here in the studio, we can see so many different sizes of paintings as well. Do you prefer large scale or small, or does it more have to do with composition, or?
Not really. Well, I do like the big canvas. It's sometimes just that extra challenge, but I enjoy doing the small ones too. I've gotten to the point that any time I do work outdoors, it has to be a fairly small one. 11 by 14 maybe is the largest I work outside.
Do you recall your largest painting that you've ever done?
The largest painting actually was a mural that I did, and I did it actually at the university. We had large spaces that I could do a grand-sized piece. The canvas was in two pieces. It had to be in two pieces for transporting. It again was a competition, and mentioned that this was one of the 1% for art. So that was the largest one I ever did, and that was more work than it was fun.
So
one of the sizes I'd like to do is like a 4 by 6 foot. I've got a couple of those here in the studio.
So that large one that you're talking about, I think I read earlier, it was 32 feet long.
All right.
So it would have been the two canvases put together for 32.
Fastened together, yeah.
That's big. Is there anything unique about the color palette you use when we're actually talking about the paint itself? And
no, I think I'm pretty open to a color. Once in a while I'll pull out a color wheel and say, well, what haven't I used for a while? Okay. But other than that, I like to force the color in things. I've got a few here that are closer to surrealism than realistic. And I've taken, a tree, and I've made free color in it, just different colors and different textures. And so it's an abstraction and surrealistic combination.
so when your father was saying, give it more oomph, do you think you achieve that more through color or through your composition, or is it both?
Well, you gotta have oomph. I sometimes give, are invited to jury shows throughout Colorado, southern Colorado anyway. And I try to talk to the students about what my dad was talking about, giving it some oomph. I said, everybody has some paintings in their corner of their studio, and you're unhappy with them. I said, pull them out, give them some oomph. And I'd have to do that to myself every once in a while. It was good advice. When I taught, I never used that phrase. Never once said, give it some oomph. If I did, I stuck around and and said, I'm talking about, maybe this area or that area. I led them through it a little more than he did for me.
Okay, that's great. So you spent part of your time in Pueblo, Colorado. Can you tell me a little bit more of how that came about?
Well, I wanted to do some teaching. I started sending out my information in various places, but right around Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, etc. And heard about a junior college down in Pueblo. So I did send my degree information down there, and the head of the department did contact me fairly soon and said he'd like to come up and talk with me. So he came up to Denver. And he was an elderly fellow. So he said, I think I'm going to go back and talk to the president about you. So that's where I got involved in going, or I didn't have to go out too often to a interview. I just had a one-time interview. I took that, and then the university grew and became Colorado State University / Pueblo.
And so there you were professor of drawing and painting, is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Well, I taught painting, I taught drawing, both beginning drawing, figure drawing as well. I taught design, quite a few different things. And even for graduates, or students soon to be graduates, we would have a career class to get them to get their portfolio together, make their choices on what type of work they wanted to do, and we brought in guest speakers too for the students on that case, where they could have the opportunity to talk to another professional about painting and about jobs that way.
Are you still involved at the university?
Only in a way that is a promotion of myself. I mean, I'm a professor emeritus.
What would you say you enjoyed most about teaching?
Well, it's an experience, and it's an exciting experience. Certainly I have been frustrated sometimes, but you have the freedom to do what you want to do or could do. And I haven't done any wild collages with foreign material or anything like that, but I had students try it, and I've encouraged them to say, okay, see what you can do with the material you have. And one of my better students actually did some watercolors and then cut them into strips and then wove them together. So you had woven watercolor paper, and I said, that's the idea. It's fun to do. So
if we come back here to Estes Park, let me back up. You also have a studio then in Pueblo, correct?
Right, yeah.
And can you tell me a little bit more about that? Is it similar to this studio? Is it different?
Well, actually, I had a couple of temporary studios. One that was for a couple of years was in a church. They had some extra classrooms, and so I said, "Well, I'll rent some space from you." And they said, "Oh, goody, get some use out of those rooms," and that worked out, for me. Then the church ended up selling, and I had to move. So I went downtown to the original post office in Pueblo. It was built in 1897, and it was at the height of the income-rich people having the material they want. So it was actually the post office, but it had 4 stories. There were individual offices. And it had marble floors that you walked on. The marble came up halfway up the side of the walls. And I have that studio still today. I'm paying rent when I'm here, but I'm keeping that studio. It's a landmark, and so that's a little variety there in studios.
Do you also host that as a gallery, kind of like you do up here as well, your studio and gallery?
It's mostly an appointment type situation down there. Yeah, I'm not advertising it much, but it is open when I have somebody interested. I can meet them there at the studio.
Where have you, help me understand, when you are throughout your career selling art here in Estes Park, do you primarily sell out of your gallery, or have you displayed or exhibited anywhere else in town?
Well, I do have some contacts at other places and galleries, but one of the best galleries actually is the one in Pueblo. It's the gallery that was started by a couple of women just to have a place to show art, but has been notoriety has taken it to greater heights. We've had exhibits in that museum from all over, photography or paintings and everything. So it's very exciting. And I had a one-man show there a couple of years back, and I had 70 paintings on display at one time. Some of them, the very early ones, and some the more late and more typical ones of my work.
So it sounds like you've done a lot of exhibits, and you've also won a lot of awards. Is there any one that you are most proud of?
I think the highlight of that was when I took the student award in the Cleveland Art Institute. I thought, wow, that's a real prize. So I went back to the hotel where I stayed, called up my dad and said, guess what? I got the first place in the student show. He said, wow. He says, that's the exact same award I got 30 years ago. So it was doubly special for me.
How have you seen the art environment in Estes Park change throughout the course of your career here?
Well, the art, there's been some, long timers, Dave Sterling, for example. But there's been the crafts, too, of art that have come along. And now they have a studio tour every year, which I have taken part in. But it's a good thing for everybody to have a chance to see a variety that way of art in 1 or 2 days.
How do you think being in Estes Park has affected your art and your creativity?
Well, without the mountains and the trees and the big sky, that's all here, and that's just what I love.
Do you think being a second-generation artist has affected your art and your style and your creativity as well?
I can't say that's changed or affected it at all. Working with my father was great, except when he wouldn't give me any help and instructions. But there's a certain camaraderie that you have there when you're working with somebody. So we would, and this is a small studio, we'd be working in different corners, and it was a good experience all the way around that way.
So this is kind of a big, open-ended question, but what are your hopes for the future of the Estes Park art community?
Well, there's a couple of different sides to that. There are some very good artists here, and maybe the worst point on having a lot of art here is a lot of it is brought in on weekends, or there are tent shows, and I think that sometimes that interferes with people seeing the actual artist studios that are here permanently.
Are there any other things you'd want to talk about, like any other contributions you've made to the community or your services on nonprofits? I know you mentioned that you were on the Cultural Arts Council of Estes Park for a while, but can you just talk about some of that stuff as well?
Yeah, I enjoyed being on the Cultural Arts Council for quite a few years. It brought in artists from other parts of the United States, gave them a chance to see the subject matter that Estes offered. It gave them a break maybe from their homeland, or where they did most of their works. So those functions are good functions, I think, have added to the Estes experience.
We're kind of winding down here, but are there any other individuals that you'd like to mention, whether it's in our community or in Pueblo, or Anybody else that were supportive and helpful along the way?
Well, you gather friends, and I think the exchange back and forth is helpful at any time. The studio I have down in Pueblo is occupied by 3 or 4 other professionals, and that's good quality experience to work with the feedback that you get from others. But you can get that course of response from almost anybody. You know, they walk in the door and they give you their opinion. So sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad.
That's great. And there are any acknowledgments you'd like to give to any family members or anything just for this recording?
Just interactions with certain people that helped a great deal. And they're always good to see, have them drop by.
Yeah, I would imagine it's only encouraging, right?
Yeah.
So the last question we always put out there, just open-ended again, are there any other stories or anecdotes you'd like to share with us, or anything that we may have left out that you can think of?
Well, I think we covered a lot about my dad and his experiences. He had some interesting experiences that when he would be going out, not necessarily to paint, but he'd be going to fish or whatever. One time they were traveling in a canyon, he and a couple other fellows, and it was a little after dark. The headlights showed a head on a curve, the road, but the road was on the other side of the river, and so the car was driven right up to that point and over the edge. And they were on a fishing excursion, and Dad said the water just rushed right into the car, filled the car up, and was halfway upside down. So the only thing he could grab onto was a roll of toilet paper.
Well, I appreciate your time. I'm glad that we got to talk about your father, by all means. I don't want to downplay your talents or contributions to the artistic community here either. Yeah, so another opportunity. Just anything else you want to share?
Well, I feel so much richer because I was around him. He was a very involved person, whether he was working on a committee or whatever. He was an inspiration.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We greatly
Sure.
appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.